Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Kobe Wilson. We're at day two of the UMD Siege EJ and Health Experience Symposium. Really excited to have everybody here today. Hopefully, you had a good day two of sessions. We started out today with Robin Morris Collin. Really powerful session with a lot of great stories, talking about her father. I think the first African American with ocean going vehicles. That was really cool to hear, and great sort of insight into what we need to be doing to work together on an environmental justice issue. She said, y'all, this is one of the things I remember. We don't have a capacity issue. People got an access issue. So that was a good point that she made during the session. Of course, we had a lot of concurrent sessions on energy issues, what EPA is doing, climate action hubs, food sessions, a lot of indigenous sessions and first food. So a really powerful keynote, lunchtime keynote from Justin Pierce and Representative Pearson from Tennessee. So really excited to hear what he was talking about and all the, as y'all know, remember the Tennessee Three. And as we close the day out, I think it's a very important session that we're about to do. And the session is entitled Environmental Justice and Economic Empowerment, not with an EM. So I've been told many times you can't give me power with an IN, empowerment. How do you connect people to power they already have, right? And after that colon, y'all, there's EJ Gold up in them hills. Okay. So this is the session. Got me stopping laughing. Because we got a lot of issues out here, everybody. So I want to introduce y'all to our speakers for this panel, the colleagues, great EJ leaders and advocates. I'm gonna start out with Jackie Patterson. Jackie is founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. The mission of the project is rooted in the just transition framework, serving as a vehicle to connect Black communities on the front line of climate justice with the resources to actualize visions. Prior to the launch of the Chisholm Legacy Project, Jackie served as senior director of the NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program for over a decade. We also have my next door neighbor, Vernice Miller Travis, lives in the Bowie area, one of the nation's pioneering and most respected thought leaders on environmental justice and the interplay of civil rights and environmental policy. Vernice was a contributing author to the landmark report Toxic Waste and Race in the United States. Also a co-founder of one of the oldest EJ organizations in the country, We Act for Environmental Justice. Vernice currently is a vice president at the Metropolitan Group, and she's done work for over 30 years in this space, including being the first program officer for Environmental Justice at the Ford Foundation, a founding director of Environmental Justice Initiative at the National Research Defense Council, on multiple boards, as already stated, and again, a great impact as an advocate, leader, and icon again for Nice in the EJ movement. We also have my fraternity brother, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. He's a renowned thought leader, international speaker, policymaker, community liaison, trainer, and facilitator. And yes, we had a conversation yesterday about reparations, restorative justice. He serves as the executive vice president for the National Wildlife Federation. He is also founder of Revitalization Strategies, a business focused on moving our most vulnerable communities from surviving to thriving. Before joining National Wildlife Federation, Mustafa was the senior vice president for the Hip Hop Caucus, a national nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that connects the hip hop community to the civic process to build power and create positive change. And our last speaker, I think she's having a few connection issues.
I'm here.
Oh, yeah. Oh no, Michelle DePass.
Okay.
Our last speaker is Michelle DePass. She's executive director of the Upside Tech Alliance, partners with local leaders across the United States to implement technology that serves the public good. And this alliance builds technology solutions that serve the public good, from measuring air pollution and decarbonizing buildings to expanding broadband access and overhauling public service payment systems. It's mission and data-driven solutions that help to build healthy, connected, intelligent cities in our climate-constrained world. So hopefully we can get Michelle on. But I think this session is really important. I'm really excited to have all the panelists today. And I just want to give a little bit of background on what this session is about. We right now are in a point in time in our country where we have a new executive order 14096 on environmental justice. We have bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and you see opportunities for economic empowerment for communities who've been left behind by disinvestment and divestment. Communities who've been overburdened and had things stacked against them as pertains to the dirty fossil fuel industry, right? And now we have these new funding streams. And it seems like that these funding streams should lead to addressing inequality, should lead to more empowerment, should lead to transformation, restoration, right, Mustafa? Reparations, maybe, right? Maybe a drop in the bucket when we talk about that subject. But we also see new groups, new organizations now come into the EJ space. We see these groups, we call it EJ tourists, who now all of a sudden are jumping into the EJ space because there's money involved. And this could be called greenwashing. This could be a form of environmental racism. This could be an extension of extractive capitalism, right? And so what we want to do in this conversation is talk about some of these issues of who who should be leading efforts to drive change in our communities, who should be leading efforts to making sure that we have true economic empowerment. And we want to start out with a question to the panel. What do you think about all these new dollars that are out there from the BIL and from the Inflation Reduction Act? What are your perspectives on how we can make sure that the money goes to the people with the most need? Those who are at the front line should be at the front of the line. What are your thoughts? I'm gonna pass the mic to Jackie first.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, I think that resources obviously are needed. I think that the volume of resources that are available is definitely significant, and that's important. I think that given the history and the depth of the disenfranchisement in so many communities, the number of communities that are living in grinding poverty in this land of plenty, that in some ways, yes, it's significant. And yes, this notion of Justice 40 is above and beyond anything we've seen before. And at the same time, and yes, it's definitely to to be something to say yes, this is what we need in terms of more resources. I think that it's not going to be enough given the structural the history and the depth of political and financial disenfranchisement. I think that some of the ways that some of the funding is structured and what's allowed with some of the funding in terms of false solutions is a significant problem. Oh, can you hear me still? I heard. Okay, good. Um, and that needs to be resolved. And I think that the way it's been structured, that is along the same lines of the very challenges that don't allow for frontline communities to access funding is another challenge that needs to be surmounted. So in terms of the actual availability of the funding, those are some of the challenges that I see. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
And who wants to go next? And just a reminder to the panelists, please mute when you're not speaking because it creates a little static that we heard. So I'll try to keep y'all muted. So you want to go next, Bernice? Let's go Bernice next.
Sure. So the question is, what are the challenges in this moment?
Yeah, you can talk about the challenges.
Well, I agree with Jackie 100%. Jackie, it's wonderful to see you. This is a moment of unprecedented opportunity, but only if that opportunity is directed to the folks who need it the most and who have gained the least over the decades or over the millennia. But let's keep it in this, in our lifetimes. It is possible to see transformative change happen in this moment. But again, only if extraordinary efforts are taken to make sure that the resources reach the people who have been so overlooked, if we rethink or revamp the processes by which we move these resources and we remove the impediments that have kept the resources from getting to the folks they were designed to get to in the first place. So, let's be clear. Since the passage of the Clean Water Act, let's just take the Clean Water Act as an example. Every community in the United States was supposed to have access to clean, safe, potable drinking water. Every community. Also, sanitary sewage, right? Since the amendments to the 1990 and 1992 amendments to the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the same. Every community in the United States is entitled to the benefits of those pieces of environmental infrastructure and environmental regulation. But we know that not every community has gotten those resources since the passage of the Clean Water Act and the amendments and the passage of the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, why is that? Because EPA couldn't find these places? That's not it, right? It's because there were folks who were in the middle of the process who were actively blocking communities from getting those resources. I have worked in too many places that don't have access to safe and sanitary drinking water, have never had it, right? It's not a new thing. The system didn't break. They never had one to begin with. I like to lift up the work that you've done, Dr. Wilson, with the West End Revitalization Association in Mebane, North Carolina. And if you've ever met the folks from WERA, they will tell you this story all the time. They have been fighting for decades to get access to safe, potable drinking water. But yet they've built new communities right next to them with golf courses that suck up a whole lot of water, and they don't have any problems getting connected to municipal drinking water. So what's the problem there? The problem is the state of North Carolina, right? Their environmental agency and the local governments, the county government, et cetera, et cetera. So the opportunity is not just that this money has been appropriated, but how do you surmount the institutional and systemic challenges that have always stood in the way from Black and brown people, indigenous people, working class and poor folk getting the things that they need? And are you willing to use the full battery of tools and power of the federal government to make sure that they get it, right? So it's like you think about the corollary is school desegregation, right? And let's just use Virginia as an example. And I did not learn this until I moved to the DMV 25 years ago. I did not know this story at all. But after the passage of Brown versus Board of Education, I think it's Loudoun County, Virginia, and Fairfax County, Virginia, decided that instead of complying with the federal order to desegregate all public schools, they shut down the entire school systems in those two counties in Virginia. And so there are a lot of Black folk who are of a certain age in Virginia who, if they didn't move out of the state, they never graduated from high school because there were no schools for them to go to. So the question is, do you use the full weight of the federal government to sue them, to take money from them, which the Civil Rights Act says Title VI of the Civil Rights Act says they have the full authority to do? Do you do those things? Because they have been intransigent when it comes to investing resources to provide a fair and equitable quality of life to all people living in these United States. And so that's the challenge. For the first time in my lifetime, money is not the challenge. The challenge is the political will to do what's right for every community, no matter who they are or where they live.
Thank you for that. And that gets back to the theme, people, power, and what you just said, politics. Go ahead, Brother Mustafa.
Well, it's an honor to be on the panel with both Bernice and Jackie and you, Dr. Wilson. You know, I'm reminded of the words of James Baldwin when he said that I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. So we have to really put these things in perspective because often when there are a number of zeros after a number, we get lost and what we should actually be asking for. You know, the 2023 budget, I think, is about $1.7 trillion. So that's a pretty big number. You go back to the beginning of the work in the federal government around environmental justice, we had $3 million for the entire country to focus on the impacts that were happening. You also have to bring into this conversation when we're looking at the current sets of number, what has been the amount of money that has been extracted from Black and Brown and Indigenous and Asian and Pacific Islander communities for hundreds of years in many instances when we put these sets of numbers that we currently have up today, because that shows you how much work needs to happen to address the injustices that have been happening both on the economic side and the health side of the equation, and a number of other areas that we can point out. So we have to put this in perspective. You know, when we talk about Justice 40, which is a great, a great theoretical initiative, the question becomes, does that help us to actually be able to rectify what has happened across our country? And as Vernice so aptly shared with us, are those resources actually making it to the spaces and places that need them the most? How do we make sure that there's real accountability in that? When we look at the federal budget, and I know we're going to talk about a number of other aspects, we also have to look at not only the percentage of dollars that are going to grants and cooperative agreements, which has often been the space that we've operated in and is a necessary space, but we also have to bring into our conversation about contracting and subcontracting opportunities where we can actually build wealth. Because it's difficult to build wealth off of grants and cooperative agreements. They are critically important and needed. But if we want to address the wealth gap, which also address some of the power dynamics in our country, then we have to also be talking about how we ensure Black and Brown and Indigenous businesses are being supported. And we know that when we look at federal contracting, that a very tiny percentage of that actually makes it to Black and Brown and Indigenous businesses. So I like to expand out our conversation so that we look at the fullness of the sets of opportunities that are out there, look at where the gaps have been, and then be very, very mindful and very intentional about the steps that are necessary for us to not just address what happened in the past, but to actually build real parity moving forward.
Great points from the panel. I mean, this issue of contracting. I mean, how do we make sure that that Justice 40 framework applies to contracted? 40% of the contracts, right? Go ahead, Vernice.
I just wanted to say one thing in response to what Mustafa said. Actually, there's a whole sector in this country who has built wealth off federal contracting, and that's as the late President Eisenhower said, the military-industrial complex, otherwise known as defense contractors. We live in defense contracting land here in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and there's so many businesses and so many consulting firms and so many contracting firms, et cetera, that have built absolute wealth for thousands of people who do not look like us for the most part, out of the contracts that they have gotten from the Defense Department and the military industrial complex, right? To support them, to do work with them, to help them do research, et cetera, et cetera. All of those other assigned duties go out in the form of millions and billions of dollars in contracts. So it is possible to build wealth in that space. And some people do nothing throughout their entire careers but serve as federal contractors. It's just that those opportunities don't come to the folks that we're used to working with and we're used to serving. And so when you think about how you transform this space, one is, as Jackie said, about how you envision and imagine the movement of that resource, but also how you envision and imagine the people who will provide the infrastructure to move that resource, right? There's layers and layers and layers with those numbers that Mustafa laid out there. That's just the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is $1.3 trillion. Then there's the IRA. Then there's the clean water investment, infrastructure investment. Then there's the Department of Energy, which is moving a whole nother mountain full of money. Then there's the Department of Transportation that's moving 2/3 of that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money is running through the Department of Transportation. All of those places are places where, one, there can be direct investment into disadvantaged and communities of color and low income and low wealth and tribal communities. All of that can meet the needs of those communities. The challenge is, how do you set up a different dynamic of who envisions how that money gets spent and who helps to move that money to the right places and the right people? How do you make sure it's not the same old, same old? And I think that's the game. How do we make sure this moment is not the same old, same old?
Man, y'all, you said so much. Y'all said so much. I got so many things I want to say. Y'all know I talk way too much. So much has been said here. So let me just try to summarize at least my response to get us into some of the controversial stuff, or maybe not controversial, just the issues around what you just said, what y'all just said, and what Robin said today. As you just said, Vernice, the wealth that's been built off contracting, and like you just said, it's not folks who come from the community, don't look like us on this Zoom call, right? And also the issues around, you're saying the contracting part. We talked about the grants, cooperative agreements part, right? So you have that piece. So, and also the systems, right? If you have systems in place that are allocating and dispersing money, they use the same old, I'm gonna use the term racist formulas, then are we gonna get the same results that we've gotten? That's something we have to ponder, right? And then as it relates to the on the ground, going back to Omega Wilson, and I'll follow with a question to kind of dig into these issues. Omega says, I know he may be listening, how you expect these racist systems to do things differently? Well, in his county, Alabama County, other counties are pulling down civil rights monuments. They're putting fences up around civil rights monuments. If that's the mentality of as the federal dollars get down to the states and down to the counties, how do you work around that? So what are some solutions, y'all, to work around some of these challenges of making sure the money actually gets into the communities? What successes, what models, what best practices can y'all share with the audience? And I'm not sure who wants to go first. Jackie, you want to jump back in on that?
Good question. Thank you. I think that connecting with folks who already know how to navigate these systems, and really leaning on them to help to facilitate the navigation and to direct. So folks like the people on this call. I mean, certainly. Brother Mustafa and Sister Bernice know how to navigate these systems. And so they really provide an amazing opportunity and portal for both knowing how to navigate the systems and knowing how to work with our communities and knowing where the barriers are and where there needs to be that facilitation and that bridging. We know also that Helen Chin is doing the same with Communities First, and there's others who are really providing this key bridging role. So that's one that, I'm a person of few words. So I'll put that out there and pass the mic. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You want to jump in with stuff on that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, there are some additional things that we can do. So first, it is always better to be in front of the process than on the backside of the process. So it's so much more difficult to then rectify what's going on. So I will say, in building the criteria at the front end is so critically important. And there will continue to be this flow of federal dollars that is going out over the next few years. So when there are opportunities to be able to modify. So right now, folks should be taking a significant look and saying, where are the gaps right now? Who is it that is not receiving dollars? And what do we need to do to be able to fix that system? The other part of it that is, so incredibly important is the accountability aspect. So we know, and, myself and others shared this when folks were developing these sets of opportunities, that there were going to be dollars that were going to go to certain states that have never been supportive of environmental justice, of civil rights, or even of climate-related issues. We see right now in the state of Florida, the governor there who is refusing to allow huge amounts of resources to come into that. That's one side. The other side is that we know traditionally that folks have taken federal dollars and then utilized them to do other things with them. So let's just be clear that we know the behaviors and actions of certain locations and even certain individuals. The other part of it is that we need to make sure that there's true forensic accounting that's happening as we're going through this. So we should have independent entities that are also helping with that. So those are sort of fundamental things, but let's bring partnership into our conversation. So we should be making sure that we are partnering with the Black MBAs and the Hispanic MBAs as people are framing out, developing their organizations, developing their businesses in this space. We should also make sure that we're partnering with the economists, which often are not brought into our conversations. It is usually a retrospective that they're utilized in. So we should make sure that we're finding ways to make that happen. So as we start to look at all of these amazing individuals who have huge amounts of brain power that have not traditionally been a part of our structures or in a part of our authentic partnerships, then we leave those gaps where folks will play games. They will find ways to redirect resources to their pet projects because they will say, well, you know what? Not enough people applied, so we had to redirect those dollars back to our state coffers or even back into the treasury. So we just have to be mindful of the strategies that people often put in place that take and extract resources from our communities and get ahead of that if we can. I can unpack more, but I want to pass it to Vernice because she's been out there doing it and navigating this as well.
Thank you, Mustafa. I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with my then beloved, not yet husband. And I was working at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and we had a policy that we didn't accept federal funding. And then we changed that policy. And the first federal grant was a grant that came to my EJ program, was a pollution prevention grant. And we did it in partnership with WEAC for environmental justice. And it was $250,000. And you couldn't tell me anything, right? I just knew that, this was like major. And so they sent me to this grants management training in federal grants management training in Los Angeles. And he was not my husband at the time, but we were dating. And I told him I was going to this federal grants management training. And he said, well, let me see if I can arrange an audit or visit with one of my grantees in Los Angeles, and I can meet you there. So something should have clicked when he said the grantee was going to see with Cedars-Sinai Hospital, right? Something just should have started moving in my brain, but it didn't. And so, he comes down, he does his thing, I do my thing, we meet for dinner, and I'm just feeling so puffed up because I got this $250,000 grant, right? And I said, well, what could we do? We NRDC do to get a grant from you at HHS. And he laughed first, and then he said, oh, babe, you all could never get a grant from us. And then I got, really offended. And I said, head starts bobbing. And I'm like, we're NRDC, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, how much are your grants anyway? And he said, well, my smallest grant is $3 million. And my largest grant is $350 million. And I'm sure all the color drained out of my face. And Charles looked at me and he said, HHS is the second largest federal agency after the Department of Defense, right? I didn't know that until he said that. But the point is, he worked in a small unit at HHS called the Division of Cost Allocation. And everybody in that division was a forensic accountant or a CPA. And they tracked every dollar that HHS gave to hospitals, universities. This is money moving through NIH, right? That's funding the public health infrastructure in the country. And it's really not that many people. And there certainly wasn't that many Black and brown people in that unit. But he opened my aperture to see that the amount of money that the federal government is moving and handling and investing really just holds up so much of the infrastructure of this country. And by infrastructure, I don't just mean bridges and tunnels and roads. I mean everything that we do. So the amount of money that the Biden-Harris administration is moving is the kind of money that is meant to create social transformation. But it's only going to do that if they put in place these pieces that need to happen. So a reimagining of how you move the system. So here's a role for philanthropy. And I'm so glad that Jackie mentioned Communities First and Helen Chin. We are challenging the philanthropic sector to meet this moment, right? And to rethink the way that they move money, but also to help fill that gap. Because you could be a small community like Alamance County, North Carolina. And let's say you get a $10 million grant to improve water infrastructure, expand municipal water services in Alamance. you have to come up with 10 to 15% of that total amount of that money in order to be able to receive that money. What do you want to bet? Alamance County probably doesn't have that much money sitting in their bank account. So there's a role for philanthropy to do that. I think, Jackie, what's the name of the group that MacArthur is funding? The Hive Fund. They are trying to do some of that intermediary grant making. The Water Foundation is trying to do some of that intermediary grant making. But sometimes intermediaries can suck up a lot of money too. So we need sort of new rules of the road, new rules of engagement, new imagination, new thinking, and we need some young people to come in and help modernize the process for how we move this money. But they, at the end of the day, they have to throw down. So my favorite thing that is happening right now in the federal government is a lawsuit that the Department of Justice, new Office of Environmental Justice, has filed against Lowndes County, Alabama, for depriving the Black citizens of Lowndes County from sewer infrastructure for decades. They get money, they get federal money, they got plenty of federal money in Alabama, but none of that money has seemed to reach Lowndes County. And so the Department of Justice has sued them for receiving that money and violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Now, could they have done this years ago? They could. We could belabor that, but they're doing it now. And I want to see them do more of that. If people are held to account for how they spend the money, how they invest the money, who gets invested in, who gets bypassed, if people are held to account and they know their consequences and those consequences are realized, right? One of the consequences is potentially this. If they find out, the federal government, that you have received federal money and you have used that money in a way that has discriminated against protected groups of people as defined by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, not only can they fine you, but they can demand that you give the money back, all of the money back. You could have spent it, but you're going to have to find some way to give it back. Now, if you start asking for money back, that's going to change the game. EPA has never done that. In the history of the Environmental Protection Agency, they've never done that. Now's their chance. Now's their opportunity.
No, powerful statements. I mean, I think that issue of, enforcement, differential enforcement, so differential utilization of dollars, right? So shifting dollars. You can look at Jackson, Mississippi. I believe Bray said yesterday, said out of 25 years of getting funding from the federal government, the city, federal funding, the city's only received funding, if I'm maybe misquoting, only 3 years out of 25 years, something like that. So you think about federal resources coming down, and then those resources being shifted or not used right. Community development block grants. We can look at the state revolving fund dollars. There's probably some inequities there. We found inequities in the Clean Water Act 319 funds in Maryland, how the differential allocation to rural communities in Maryland compared to urban areas like Anacostia River area, right? So you have those issues. We can track that. So I think it's really important points that have been made here. Tracking all the dollars and making sure there's enforcement of Title VI and other relevant laws and regulations as relates to make sure that, as you said, for these protected classes are getting those dollars. Now, I'm gonna be a little bit mischief, y'all. I'm gonna go back to this EJ Goldman Hills. I want to shift the conversation a little bit, and y'all know where I'm going with this. I'm gonna talk about those EJ speculators, right? There's not the title for a reason. EJ Goldman and them Hills. So we talked about wealth building, right? And making sure that the communities have been disinvested in divestment. Think about the conversation we had with Mustafa yesterday. Thank you for that conversation, Mustafa. But now I want to talk about, and I'm not sure it's the best way to say this, y'all. How do you feel about the speculators now who are coming to this space, who for years, I won't name names, I may say a letter and an acronym, but for years say EJ wasn't an issue. For years, it's Mission Creek, Bernice. For years, we've only focused on conservation. We only just academic institutions. For years, we don't really deal with that issue, right? You have other greens, big greens, global greens. If you fall in that bucket, you know who you are. You may have an institute in your name or a future in your name. I'm gonna stop being bad, Malita. I'm gonna just say one word, but you know who I'm talking about. Or you could be an organization that could be a firm, right? You talked about the contractors, Bernice, all the contractors now. What do you say about all these folks who now see this gold, they see this green, and they all of a sudden are jumping into this space. I think it's problematic. Not because my name is Wilson. It is Wilson, and I'm a gatekeeper. Get off my lawn. Maybe a little bit of it. How do y'all feel about that? How do you feel about this? Because I think it gets back to this issue of being extractive. It gets back to a form of environmental missionaryism and environmental colonialism, right? Corporate colonialism, right? It gets to me, it's a form of pain pimping. I just want to say that. I don't want to go too much farther because I'm probably hurt some people's feelings. I love y'all out there. You know who I'm talking about. I'm gonna go to Mustafa first. What's your thoughts? I hope I don't get you in too much trouble. But go ahead, Mustafa.
You know, you can't get me in trouble. I am a free black man. That's why I have my own company. This is not the first time that this has happened. It's just happening in a much more spotlighted way, and there's so many more resources. If you go back to the Clinton administration, first time there was an administration that began to focus on environmental justice, they had a small amount of resources that also began to focus on these issues. And you saw a bunch of folks rush into the space. And as soon as those dollars were gone, they disappeared. So this is not our first rodeo. It is just that at this time we are riding Clydesdales instead of Shetland ponies, in the size and the amount of resources that are out there. You know, there has to be authenticity in the set of work that's happening. You also should have some type of a track record around the work that's happening. You know, it's interesting. When we really want to be able to prioritize stuff, we will create these systems to be able to do it. Look at buildings as an example. If we want to be able to tell if somebody is LEED certified, if they're platinum or these types of things, there are certain criterias that have to be in place before you are allowed to be able to enter into that world, if you will. So I don't know exactly how you put that together. I know some of us had some conversations early on when we knew that there was a significant amount of resources when we were thinking about Build Back Better and these various things that were out there. And we had, pretty good idea that there would be those who would then try and move into this space. But it really becomes one, I think that we have to be willing with love and grace to call out those who are not doing the work authentically. And I think, but we also have to be willing, if someone truly wants to do the work and is willing to put the time and effort in, then we have to figure out a way to partner with them and to mentor them before, they jump into this set of work. That gets a little tricky, but, we have to be able to get our arms around this, because once again, I've seen it time and time again. If resources are not utilized by our organizations, then they will move to other organizations. So I applaud the limited amount of resources that went into helping to build capacity before some of this stuff rolled out, but we also knew that there was not enough time dedicated there or resources to fully build the capacity for so many amazing organizations who've been operating with $5,000, $10,000. Sometimes people felt good if they had a $50,000 budget. So there was also intentionality in not building that capacity by some, because they knew that they would then be able to fill the gap, if you will. So I'm going to pass the mic. I'm going to take my sister Jackie Patterson's advice, and I'm going to be quiet and listen.
Let me say one more thing. I'll be bad here. Now I won't name too many names, but just to add to what you're saying, Mustafa said about authentic engagement. Where's your track record of being in this space, right? And I think, seeing a lot of the groups, I think there's groups that have brand, and so brands are coming in because they're in the environmental space, but not in EJ space, and they're getting funding that should be going to EJ groups. Let's just have some real talk there. You have folks who don't look like the folks on this panel because of people, their comfort level with group membership, they're getting funding, right? You have people in the academic sector who have no track record in EJ, but because they can slap together a nice shiny application, they're getting funded. Okay, and so I find that to be problematic, because from a Justice 40 perspective, they're going to think about Justice 40. I'm going back to 40 Gates of Mule, conversation we had yesterday, Mustafa. then 40% of the money should be going to frontline fence line communities. Minimum 40% of the money should be going to Black and Brown Indigenous tribal folks. 40% of the money should be going to MSIs, Indigenous colleges, HSIs, Hispanic Service Institutions, historically Black colleges, primarily Black institutions. If you're going to do it right, that's how you should be doing it. So I'm going to say that. I'm going to put the gauntlet down and speak truth to that issue because I found it highly problematic. The number of organizations that are getting funding off of people's pain, right? You can't be in this space talking about environmental justice and talking about you're curious about what people are going through. That's macabre. Folks, this is not a zoo. This is not a safari. We don't need you in this space because you got a brand, because you can slap together a nice a PowerPoint, a grant proposal. Let me be quiet and pass the mic to Jackie. I'm getting a little bit too spirited here. Go ahead, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I want to kind of just give a couple of examples of why it is that this isn't just like an abstract concept and what actually happens when the money doesn't go to the right folks. I mean, we've had frontline communities that have been really objectified by folks who are using them to get funding and using their struggles to get funding, and then shortchanging these communities, and even when they do get the funding. So whether it's communities, there's a community in the Midwest where folks came in and they said, oh, these coal plants are killing you, and these many people are dying because of coal plants, these many hospitalizations. And so the community, yes, I mean, in some ways it was one could argue that it's helpful to kind of have this wake up because the community knew that they were burying people. They knew that their kids were in the hospital from asthma and so forth, and they didn't necessarily tie it to the coal plant. And so they were like, okay, we're ready. So they got up there and they got organized. But then this entity was like, oh, okay, so then we're going to shoot for an announced retirement by this date. And we don't really care when they actually retire this coal plant. As long as they get an announced retirement, then they were meeting the funding that they were trying to go after, the criteria for the funding. And so the community was then being pushed to just settle for this announced retirement. And that date, represents all the folks who they were burying between now and then. And the community really fought back and said, well, no, that's not what we want. The folks said, well, we need to kind of go with what's feasible. The community said, no, we're going to fight for what we want. And because the community stepped away and stepped out, then they actually achieved getting the coal plant closed by the next year instead of an announced retirement that was 5 years away. Because they said we refuse to bury any more people that are being polluted by this coal-fired power plant. And so that's an example of kind of what happens when the communities aren't in the lead, and then what happens when the communities are in the lead. So what they did was better for their community and better for the planet, because that was that many less greenhouse gas emissions that were going into the atmosphere. I could give example after example after example that are just that similar, where these folks come in for the money and therefore they have the limited vision based on, what they think needs to happen to get the money, as opposed to the community that's really looking at lives and well-being of themselves and their planet. So I'll just leave with that illustrative example.
Before I pass the mic to you, Vernice, I know I'm talking way too much, and people texting me saying you're talking way too much. So one thing to add on, just to push a little bit on this issue. Another point is when you hire somebody from the community who looks at the community as your DEI hire to lead your new program to help you get that money. I just want to also throw as another example that we see time and time again of groups who've never been in this space who have, from a Green 2.0 perspective, y'all know Green 2.0, looking at diversity of foundations, academic, civic, green groups, etc. You hire that one person and you build a whole illusion of having a real infrastructure and interest in addressing these issues, and you get money that way as well. I just want to throw that's another example. Go ahead, Vernice. I'm gonna start talking. Go ahead, Vernice.
So that just makes me think to share something out. I was interviewing Rhonda Chapman recently for a project, and Rhonda said, we have to be conscious of the fact that because we have been steeped and lived in a system that is built from the inside out on white supremacy, that oftentimes we can replicate those behaviors. and not realize that we are replicating those behaviors, because that's the only system that we've been functioning in, right? So wherever you are, whatever seat you occupy, you have an obligation to try and figure out what is going to serve the needs of the folks who have had their needs unmet for decades, right? But that means you are a conduit. It's not about you, right? It's about what doors you can open up, what systems you can help people understand, what tables you can get people to. You know, as the namesake of Jackie's organization said, if they don't invite you to the table, they'll bring a folding chair, right? And you know, if you've heard me talk about these issues over the decades, you know I always say, go to the planning board meetings, because you can believe every planning board in the United States is meeting now with a fervor. How are we going to get that federal money? And how are we going to prioritize the projects that we want to see? If you're not in the room, then your issues and your priorities are not showing up on the agenda. Trust and believe. If you are not in the room is not a pleasant room. The meeting is boring as all get out. People might actually be hostile and be saying some ignorant things, particularly if you're in Florida or some other red states, but you still got to be in that room. And you got to push other people to get in that room. So if you know people who are accountants, if you know people who are doing some of that contracting work, get them in these rooms, pivot their attention and focus them on these opportunities, because we need everybody, right? And we have some of everybody. You know, I so resonate with what Robin said this morning. It is not about capacity, right? We done built every system and managed every system for everybody everywhere, right? We have done it all for everybody. But somehow when it comes time to do it for ourselves, there's no resource. There's no place for you to be. There's no position. So create your own damn position. What did Jackie do? Jackie said, I'm not asking anybody for anything. I'm building my own thing, okay? And I'm going to get out here and serve the people. That's in this moment. That's what we need to do. But in terms of the pimping aspect, you know, you can structure memorandums of understanding. Go get you some good lawyers, right? Some good lawyers. I hear Leslie Fields is available these days to help you structure these memorandum of understanding about what is the partnership going to look like? What are the goals? What are the objectives? What's the split in resources? If we're going after $1 million grant, then $850,000 got to come to the community or to the project, right? And then how do you sustain that work over time, right? So it's not just a one-time grant, but it's the maintenance of the project. If it's a new water infrastructure, that has to be maintained. That's the problem in Jackson. No money to maintain their water infrastructure system. So it broke, and then it just kept getting more broken over the years. How do you identify what all these needs are, get all the people you need on the team to help you identify that? The Deep South Center for Environmental Justice and the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice are doing this across the Gulf Coast with their Justice 40, a time for righteous investment. I'll say one last thing on this. There are some amazing people who are working in the federal government now. And I really want to give a shout out to the team at the Department of Energy. They brought 7 people to the last convening that the Deep South Center held. And they gave people technical assistance in office hours, in sessions, in plenary. They were all over that room. And there were about 150 community folks there helping people understand what is the process at the Department of Energy, where is the money, how do you find it, what do you need to get it, what do you need in terms of your own capacity. That's what we need the federal government to be doing. I see the Department of Energy doing that, and I just want to lift up the team of people over there. They have hired some amazing EJ folks to do some really good work. EPA has hired some good folks. HHS has hired some good folks, but they need more. And they need to be focused on this 365 days a year. Okay, maybe a couple days off for holiday celebration, but otherwise we got to be about transforming this system, because the money is not going to last forever. It's a lot, as Mustafa said, it's a lot of zeros, but it's going to come to a close, and we have to make sure that it gets invested in the best ways, the most judicious ways, the ways that we can defend how the money has been spent, because they're going to come for us. You get a grant, you can believe the IRS is coming to see you. Okay, how is that money being spent? We have to put all those systems in place and do that, but this is a time for transformation. It's not a time to continue the patterns and practice of discrimination and invisibilizing our communities again. If we come out of this without making fundamental changes in our communities, then we all need to hand in our badge, right? That we are advocates on behalf of our own people and our own communities. We got to make a systemic change here, and we need everybody to get into this fight and do this on behalf of the people who need it the most and who have suffered the most.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I think the point about we're in the boom phase, we can be in bust. You are authentic partner, right? Are you really in? And going back to what Representative Pearson said, what he said, you got to be all in. You got to get some rest, right? But you got to be all in. And Mustafa, you want to chime in on this a little bit? I want to talk about some of these infrastructures that we can activate more. With the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we're going to have a session, closing plenary session on Friday, talking about another financial empowerment session, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. But can you talk about CDFIs and some of these community banks and how they can play a role in helping with investments and making sure and acting as systems to make sure that these dollars are getting to communities with the most needs? What about community banks, that banking, that local banking infrastructure, green banks, etc.? What role do you see in making sure that EJ gold that's in them hills get to the people with the most need?
Yeah, well, on the financial side, the banking side of the equation is incredibly important. For the financing that's necessary, the infrastructure, or where there's been non-existent infrastructure, making sure that Bernice had mentioned earlier about the matching that so many people often have to go through. I don't ever want to have to see people get loans, but if there are going to be loans, then it has to be extremely low interest loans to be able to do that. As we talk about this new clean economy, these entities also play a critical role in that space, to help people to have the financing that's going to be necessary. So let's say, hypothetically, you want to move into the EV charging space. It's going to take resources to be able to, handle the manufacturing side, if that's the part you want to be on the installation side. So these types of financial institutions play a critical role in helping to be that bridge that's necessary, where you may not want to go necessarily to some of the brand name banks that are out there that have played a role in some of the unfortunate devastation and destruction inside of our communities. So they play a critical role. But again, even when we look at the green banks, right, or some of these other things that are being put in place, we have to ask the question about who are the decision makers in that space and what role does our voices play? Do you have any form of an advisory committee that's there as you're making decisions about where you're going to invest? So we have to ask these hard questions, but not only should we have to ask these hard questions, but there should be an opportunity for the modification of entities to make sure that they are 21st century organizations that I often talk about. So it is a critical component, but it is also a component that has to meet the moment. And we know that in the past, many of our financial institutions have played a role in some of the negative things that have happened. But now, there are some well-meaning folks who are in that space. We just need a whole bunch more. And this is also an opportunity to make sure that younger people are also moving into this space. Folks who are studying finance in college or graduate school, having an opportunity to also be sometimes on the ground floor or to move into this space.
And let me just add to that piece. The National Community Reinvestment Coalition is an entity that I think we need to be doing more collaborative work with. They throw down and focus on the financial sector, including the Department of the Treasury, and the rules for the road for banks, and making sure that banks are fulfilling their Community Reinvestment Act requirements. They use community benefits agreements also, but that's to move resources, financial resources through banks into communities through community development finance institutions, right? Those institutions or organizations that are on the ground in communities looking to help move resources, financial resources, to meet community needs. We need to be in conversation with them. They're also throwing down around the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, with HHS and and in the courts. The reason that that's important to us in this conversation is the rules for the road around, oh my god, now I can't think of the term, but there's a particular issue that environmental justice folks use that is found in the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. The folks who work on fair housing don't often apply it or understand what it means to us, but the National Community Reinvestment Coalition is leading the charge on that effort as well. We need to be linking up with a lot of people that we don't normally work with. And you mentioned all the minority serving institutions. I'm saying the community development finance folks, the community development corporations. This is a moment for us to really pull together the infrastructure that already exists in our communities to move together to make the kind of transformation that this moment portends.
So thank you for that. Oh, go ahead, Jackie. You want to chime in again?
Is there a new question since I was bounced off?
Oh, no, you're bouncing up. No, we're just trying to talk about, what are some of the infrastructures, this last part of the comment that I asked to Mustafa, what are some of those infrastructures outside of the ones that were just shared by Mustafa and by Bernice that we should be engaging to, again, make sure that these resources are getting to the communities with the most need? And so I'll stop there because I have a follow-up question, a separate question. Go ahead, Jackie.
Okay. I mean, I think I kind of answered that a little bit before, but I would also just add on to what Bernice just said, is that we just pulled together a group of, we're actually doing a series of meetings with Black base building organizations to begin to think about how some of these base building organizations can consider coming together, as Bernice and Mustafa said, because that coming together is so critical. And there are people who have both organizational infrastructure, but also just knowing that they have relationships with existing infrastructure, with their chapter structure, their affiliate structure, already organized in communities, small communities, big communities throughout the country. They're an excellent avenue to ensure that these resources are accessed throughout the nation, rural communities, urban communities, because we know the urban bias is real, but yet there are folks who really need these resources in rural communities in particular. And a lot of these base building organizations uniquely have ties to be able to ensure that the base building, that the rural communities have the pathways to access as well. So that's the only thing I would add to what I said before. Thank you.
So I want to follow up again on I think Mustafa may have mentioned it, entrepreneurship, the role of entrepreneurship as it relates to financial empowerment. And as you've already said, Jackie, maybe Vernice said it in giving Jackie's flowers as it relates to set up your own organization. So let's, what does that mean, being an entrepreneur? What does it mean being an entrepreneur in this space? We'll have a session later on, symposium, Founders Forward, talking about entrepreneurs in the climate solution space down south. I think this will be an interesting session. But what is it? How can we use social impact entrepreneurship to help us get that financial empowerment? Make sure that EJ Go gets to those frontline, fence line EJ communities. Mustafa, you want to jump in on that?
Well, I would say Jackie's done it better than anybody I know, so maybe Jackie should start.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Thank you. I think one principle and combination of principle and practice is thinking outside of the box that we've been given. So often when it comes to, one of the things that I often kind of talk about in terms of this glut of money that's coming in is that as we think about the cautionary tale from people who have won the lottery and where they end up a few years later. There are so many cautionary tales to be told there. And so we really need to think about how we're using this money to actually pave a path towards liberation, not just, filling kind of immediate needs in a very kind of temporary way, but how are we actually re-engineering, so to speak, our society and our communities in a way that where this is an investment in lasting change. And so that would be the thing that I would say. Think about, how do we seed instead of buying food, how do we buy seeds? Instead of, yeah, so in all the analogies there, like, how do we ensure that this is actually transformative for us, and what are the ways that we're thinking about doing that? Because so much attention is kind of going to making sure that as much of this money gets to our communities as possible, and not enough to, like, how do we actually ensure that this is transformational for our communities?
That's the word, everybody. Transformation. Instead of what you say, instead of growing, buying food, planting seeds. I didn't say it right. I said growing communities. I messed it all up. growing communities. How do you grow a community? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How can we use this to transform? Going back to our comment from 4 years ago, Jackie. How do we create a ecotopia? Make
Yes.
Wakanda real, right? How do you make Wakanda? Remember that conversation? How do we make
Yeah.
Wakanda real?
Yes.
And I think just to keep it in a positive frame. I want to get people too riled up about my looking at certain groups in a certain way about I'm not sure you should be in this space. But as Mustafa said, we want to have a spirit of solidarity and allyship. So if you are if you want to be in this space, how can we mentor people, as Mustafa said earlier, and how we can build those partnerships? Now, King, I know we talked about partnerships a little bit. Can we dig in again on that point? Just want to leave the audience with some positive examples of innovative partnerships in this space that have had impact. I know, Jackie, you talked about some of your work. We talked about Hav. We talked about some of the other examples. But there are other partnerships that we can highlight for the audience here.
One thing I'll say very quickly, and I definitely want to pass the mic, but just as even though it didn't quite fully work out the way it was envisioned, but I would definitely point people to Damian Goodman and Crenshaw Rising, when there was, in Crenshaw in South LA, I think,
South
yeah,
Central. Yeah.
South Central, yeah, when the community was had this abandoned mall basically that was up for sale, then they were able to get the capital that would have been necessary to buy that mall and really make it, again, a transformational space for the community, multi-use, with housing, with economic development opportunities, and really creating a circular economy in that community. So I think that vision, their ability to get the capital to achieve that vision, like, those are the kinds of paths that I think we should be thinking about. How do we follow? So I just leave that one concrete example. Thank you.
Mustafa, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump. There are so many different opportunities that are out there. I think of the amazing work that Reverend Floyd Flake did in Jamaica, Queens, or Buster Soros in Jersey City, about how they were able to, from a faith-based model, to bring a number of different entities together to begin to meet the needs that exist inside of communities. You can look at the work that Harold has done down in the Regenesis Project, 144 partners coming together, each one bringing something special to the mix, if you will. And it'd be great to have Harold be able to actually tell his story about how they were able to make that happen. The other part that we often miss, and I know that it can be tricky and how you approach it, is that we have to also bring the arts and culture into the space and those organizations who have expertise there. There are all these folks who come from our communities who understand many of the impacts that were there. Then they make, a great record or movie or whatever, and they might move on, but they still have roots that exist in the places that they come from. And so how do we authentically, making sure that we're not pimping them and they're not pimping us, do work together, because they can cross barriers sometimes that others might have a more difficult time in being able to do. And they can also get messages out that reach huge amounts of folks. And I worked on Capitol Hill. Let me tell y'all something real quick in 15 seconds. When you have a cultural influencer who goes to Capitol Hill, you'd be surprised how these congresspersons will throw their hands up in the air just to be next to these individuals and have a conversation. So we have to use all the tools that are in the tool bag, as long as it's being authentically done, to be able to move the levers of power wherever they might be. There are other types of partnerships also, but I want to create enough time so that Vernice can educate us like she's been doing me for the last, I ain't saying how long it's been a long time.
Go ahead, Vernice. Oh, Vernice, you're muted. Go ahead.
I want to go back to legally structuring relationships, or at least putting down on paper what we expect of these partnerships. But I do think that there are some folk who are really trying to stretch the the historical culture of the organizations and institutions that they're in to meet this moment. And one of those people is Dr. Margot Brown at the Environmental Defense Fund, and the work that Margot is doing with the Frontline Resources Institute. They moved $1 million last year, joint fundraising, mostly fundraising done by Margot and EDF, but then moved that money, $1 million of those dollars, to invest in capacity building and other needs for frontline EJ organizations. There's more of that to come. They're building the infrastructure of that, but that process is led by frontline EJ leaders. And there are other models like that. Jackie, what's the board that you're on? Spinoff from the Pisces Foundation.
Oh, Mosaic.
Mosaic is another model that's doing great work like this. People are thinking out the box and are figuring out ways to do this. And so I would just say, just like any other relationship, write it down, what you expect, what you want, and what everybody's bringing to the table and what everybody will be taking back. And just like any other set of relationships, we teach people how to treat us, right? It's like a personal relationship. It's like a professional relationship. And now this is a community-wide, organizational, regional, national relationship. Establish the foundation for how you want that relationship to flow. And then do not take your eyes off the ball. Do not change, right? Do not compromise your values, because there's so much on the table. But Jackie is right. One of my colleagues at Metropolitan Group says all the time that my favorite word is transformational, because hardly a sentence comes out of me where I'm not talking about transformation. I want to transform systems. I want to transform organizations. I want to transform the government. I want to transform the infrastructure around the government that supports the government, the contracting industry, which I'm in. Every place I go, I want transformation between those entities and the people who look like me and who live in the places that I live in, where my family is, where the people that I care about are. I want this moment to be a moment of transformation. And so I couldn't agree with Jackie and Mustafa more. We have great opportunity, but we're only going to realize this opportunity if we put in place the structures for how those transformations can take place. It's not going to happen by people doing the same thing that they've been doing and now just getting a whole lot more money to do the same things they've been doing, right? That's like the definition of insanity, right? You keep using the same systems and expecting different outcomes. You got to change the systems and change the people in the systems if need be.
And not use the master's tools, but I'll leave that alone. Okay.
Say that again. Say that again.
We can't use the master's tools, right? I don't want to go too deep on folks right now, but I know, Mustafa, you got a roll. I want to give y'all a last couple seconds of your last thoughts before we close us out. So, Mustafa, what do you got for us to close us out?
Probably the words that people have heard me share before from James Baldwin. Y'all know I'm a Baldwin. When he said that if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things that you don't see. That's what we've been sharing with folks here today, is the areas that folks often miss, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and how to be able to navigate that, and how to actually, as my grandmother says, you have power unless you give it away. Either reclaim your power or build your power. And that's the moment that we find ourselves in. And when Bernice talks about transformation, y'all know that resonates with me.
Thank you, Mustafa. Jackie, you want to go? Last thoughts?
Yeah, no, I would just say that transformation is possible, that transformation is already happening, so that we know that there are communities that are microcosms of the society that we need to have, one that's rooted in the principles of regeneration and cooperation and caring and solidarity. And I would just also end with the words of the now banned poet laureate, Amanda Gorman, that we can do it, that we can see the light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I know, Bernice, you just talked about transforming systems, and so you want to just give us a quick 30 seconds to close this out?
I'm just looking for my favorite Toni Morrison quote, and I'm just gonna try to remember it. If you are free, then the obligation that you have is to free somebody else, right? So of course you could have a whole dialectical conversation on whether or not we free. I'm not going to debate that. But if you think you're free, right, then your obligation is to free somebody else, some communities from the things that they've been trapped in, some spaces that people are not thriving in. If we have some opportunities at this moment, our obligation is to make sure that those obligations find and rest with other people in other places. That's our moral obligation to each other, right? And that's not exactly what Toni Morrison said, but that's more or less the theme of what she said. If you are free, your obligation is to free somebody else.
Thank you, panel. Liberation, empowerment, liberation, transformation. I appreciate y'all. Appreciate family being on this Zoom with us today about EJ go up in them hills, get to that financial and economic empowerment. I really hope everybody enjoyed the day 2 of the symposium. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So day 3, we'll have a break day tomorrow, everyone, and we'll have Thursday will be hybrid at Stamp Student Union at University of Maryland College Park. We'll start early. We'll have a faith breakfast, I believe, Thursday morning. We'll have a Friday will be virtual again because of a certain challenge we're having, but we'll have a Friday will be virtual, and then Saturday will be in person. And a lot of the workshops and technical assistance kind of sessions will be on Friday and Saturday. So I hope to see everybody here who can be in person. And just really want to give again thanks to the panelists, thanks to our opening keynote speaker Robin Morris Collin. Again, great insight, great stories, talking about what we need to do moving forward to really address inequality. Also, Justin Pearson, seeing a youth leader in many ways in this EJ space as an advocate and activist, talking about his work in Tennessee, and all the great sessions that we have today. So thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed day 2. Looking forward to the next day. And remember, it's about people, it's about power in politics, and really it's about a democracy. So how we can work together to build solidarity and make sure we are supporting communities on the front line, the fence line, to address environmental, climate, and energy justice issues. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great evening, and see you on Thursday. Take care.
Thank you for this panel.
Thank you. Thanks, family. Hey, bye-bye.